Hi, my name is Ryan Jenkins. I'm in the senior seminar class, and I'm going to do my analysis on the Iron Jawed Angels film, and this is my video. So first off, I'm going to start off that I think I kind of enjoyed this movie a little bit more than I thought I would, just because I thought it was interesting to see a movie that was from, I think it was 1912 was the original timeline, and it seemed like a pretty recent film. Hilary Swank was still pretty modern, I guess is the right word, but I enjoyed the film. It starts off, it talks about how the redheads studied in Oxford and how the two women had a goal in mind that they wanted the right to vote, and they felt like they had a plan in mind that they could do this sort of thing. So they went to the, I guess, I forgot their names, but the more educated women to show their plan, but unfortunately they kept finding holes in it, shooting them down, that sort of thing. And that's where I'm going to go to my first notes from the book on page 16 that it says, in general, the different style and organization of the two branches were largely derived from different kinds of political education and experiences of each group of women. And I think this relates a lot to the movie because Hilary Swank was, although she came from Britain and they saw her more as a foolish woman, they said, they didn't like her ideas and they thought that she was just kind of foolish trying to go about this. And because they were differently educated than she was, they feel like what she was trying to do wouldn't work. She feels like she wanted to have a parade that wouldn't have worked, and they thought that this was all kind of silly, and they were just sticking with what they had already been grown up on, what they had already learned in the last couple of years. So the Britons, they said, gave suffrage a bad name. Instead, they eventually gave her the right to go to Washington to have this parade after moving her into a really run-down, beaten place, I think, that she had to work out of. During this time, her and her friend, which I forgot her name, but I'm just going to call her the redhead, they were out front trying to inspire other people. Lots of other working women were walking by, and she meets this foreign lady who shoots her ideas down as well and says, you know, like, do you have kids? What would happen if you lost your job? You know, would you be able to support them? Eventually, the foreign lady kind of understands and sees her ideas, and Swank inspires her with her wisdom, and she basically joins her movement. It also kind of fast forward a little bit to the black lady that comes into this movie where she also feels the same way, except I think what was going on is they wanted to have the black people in back because segregation was still a thing. I think. I'm not sure if I picked that up or if that was wrong, but so she was included in that, but I think during the parade at some point they just jumped into the middle anyways and they didn't care. So black one comes in and sparks just the racial adversity, I guess, that they had to undergo. We're going to fast forward a little bit more. It's starting to get more and more progressed. It's starting to become a bigger thing. She meets a guy from the Washington Post, the President Wilson, I think it was, you know, meeting her ideas, and he understands. However, he's kind of the same way. He was educated differently from her, so he feels like what they're doing, they might as well just stick to what's working and like not rock the boat in a sense. Which again, Hilary Swank is like, no, that's wrong because you know we've grown so much as a nation and we should be able to do this. Women should have the right to vote. You know, we can do all these other things. Why can't we vote? And Wilson, while agrees with this, I think in a sense, he also just is kind of like, you know, like why rock the boat? So eventually, she ends up some of the people in her movement end up going to jail over this thing, and that's another key point to this movement. I think that kind of relates to our violence discussion that we had either the last week or the week before. That you know, violence is a normal thing in any movement, whether it's Gandhi being peaceful or Martin Luther King doing really sit-ins, just quiet protesting. They can turn violent no matter what side. If it's supposed to be a quiet and peaceful sit-in and protest, that doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way, which again happened in the parade, which is what they wanted to in this movie. Hilary Swank wanted this parade to turn violent, I think, so we grabbed the attention of other people that would show that this movement about just getting the right to vote all of a sudden turned violent. Like, why did it turn violent? Why are they stopping her? Why did they have to resort to this? And then eventually, Hilary Swank herself gets sent into jail, and it brings up another point that on my second part of this book, that when she goes to jail and to join the rest of the women that are in her movement that are in jail, the movement still continues outside of the jail. So for this one, I'm going to turn to page 21, I think it was, and what I'm going to read is the role of the organizer in the movement formation is another neglected aspect of the literature. There's been great concern with leadership, but the two roles are distinct and not always performed by the same individual. And this is also relating to the movie because Hilary Swank was, although she was the start, her and her redheaded friend started this movement. They feel like they got enough people into this movement, they had enough people with them that if something were to happen to them, in this case, both of them going to jail, that somebody would be able to take care of it on the outside, and that's exactly what happened. As soon as she went into jail, there were still protests. At one point, they were out front of the White House reading quotes from one of the past presidents, and then they would burn it, I think. They were starting a fire, and that turned violent too. That was just another reason that, why did it have to turn violent? We were just peacefully, granted what they were doing was a little bit abrasive. I don't think burning that was really necessary. I think they got their point across just by saying the quotes from the past president. If it wasn't Wilson, I don't know who it was, I forgot. But yeah, it continued outside of that while they were still in jail. Finally, Swank gets her word out to the Post while she's in jail after she goes a couple weeks. I'm going to assume the timeline is they do a hunger strike where they're not eating. And I think this is where the movie gets a little bit far-fetched, I think, because I don't know, I've never been to jail and I've never had a hunger strike or participated in one, but I feel like this is also relates to our discussion. I've never participated in some kind of protest or movement like this. However, I feel like if there was something that I would partake in, back in our past discussions, I'm pretty sure I mentioned a hunger strike would be something I think I would be okay with, because that's realistically nothing bad. I don't think I would starve myself to death, because that seems a little bit crazy, but I don't really think there's any other movement that resulted in a hunger strike that resulted in many people dead. I'm sure some people have, and that sparked more political adversity, I guess, that they're going against. But I also think that that's something that I would partake in, and I liked that they did that in the movie. I didn't like how they force-fed her to eat. They mixed up eggs and made her, put a contraption to keep her mouth open so she could eat. I thought that's where the movie got a little bit out of hand. That was too much, but I think it did kind of follow the lines, because, it showed when they got the word out to the Washington Post and they posted about this, that they weren't being able to seek legal counsel, and they were getting force-fed after a hunger strike. That's when it really raised national attention. That's when the president had to do something. That's when all eyes were on them. Finally, I'm going to go to my last part in the book, which is just how our movement's organized. This is on page 156. This is all three of those are coming out of our text. The main thing it talks about is the social movements were thought to be extremely disorganized affairs. Individuals were believed to drift into them for personal reasons rather than political reasons, and crowds were thought to be irrational and shifting in their focus, hence why manipulated by demagogues. I'm not sure what that word means, but I think this relates perfectly to this book, because it kind of shows all the people involved in this movement, from Hilary Swank to her redheaded friend to the more educated women in the beginning of the movie that they were talking to that gave her the option to do this parade, to go to Washington and fight for this. And finally, that foreign lady who's right when they're in Washington and they're protesting for the first time, that changes her mind and decides to join that, and is expressing what Hillary just said to her, I'm guessing her colleagues or her work friends, I don't know, something. I just like how it all comes together. People, regardless of their reasons, at first she's like, I'm not going to participate. I participate on Sunday, all of a sudden Monday I lose my job and my kids starve. And she saw that, but at the same time she's like, she put her ideals out of the way and brought, or her political idea out of the way and brought her actual ideals of what she believed in, and she supported this. And that's why she jumped on board with Hillary Swank. And the other people, I'm sure, did the same thing. Other people probably didn't want to do this because of the backlash they would probably receive, and everything's been the same for so long. Why now all of a sudden is it going to be any different? So because of that, I feel like their movement just grew, because all these women were feeling the same way, but nobody wanted to do anything. Nobody wanted to rock the boat. Everybody wanted to stay exactly where it was, and just until it got worse. It wasn't really the worst thing ever, but they needed this, and they needed that movement. Finally, my last closing thoughts, some of the opposing views of the movements, they see their point as right and the others see it as wrong. I think that's kind of a main thing that follows this theme throughout the entire movie, from the women in the beginning who see Hillary's idea, but the whole thing, I feel like the motto of this movie was don't rock the boat. Everybody wanted to keep everything the same, I feel like. Not that they said that it was it wasn't wrong. I'm sure people understood. All the men, all the president, everybody saw that women not having the right to vote was probably a bad thing. And just because they didn't have the right to vote for the last however many years, they thought, why should today be any different? Why should we do anything different? Now that this movement actually came to surface, I'm sure there's been other little protests and small stuff that probably died off. And like we said in our previous discussion about can a movement die, I feel like a movement can die, and I feel like the women's suffrage movement did die. I feel like it never really, it might have started here in this movie. The timeline was 1912. I feel like that was the most successful campaign of women's suffrage to this date. But I'm sure there were previous ones where they just didn't get their point across. They didn't get the support and the ambition that they needed to drive their movement, and therefore it just died. But the thing about this is it didn't die completely, where it never came back. It just went down. It was just gone for a little bit. It was on a pause, basically, until the right person, in this movie, Hilary Swank, took over, had the right ideas, and she had the pursuit to get this done. And that just kind of goes to show that, she thought what she was doing was right. Everybody else kind of saw her point of view, but they just didn't want to change it. They didn't want to rock the boat. And you may choose to lean more towards one side than another, particularly just because it's been that way for so long. And that's kind of what most of the men did. That's kind of what the president did. That's kind of what the women in the beginning did. They all were just so set on these ways that they feel like they didn't really have to change that much. But once Hillary Swank started going and the movement started rising and the parade happened and the violence was going on during that, and they ended up getting to jail, raising national attention. And finally, at the very end, one of the women from the beginning, I think, walks up to the president's campaign manager or something and told him, I'm not going to, there's no need to do introductions. You know what I want. And I know your president's probably worried about this, so let's, make something happen. And I think that's exactly what happened. In the end of the movie, they ended up getting out of jail. They were sitting, waiting for the vote. One of the guys changed their color of their flower. I guess the red meant they were against it. But as soon as it was his turn to decide, he was the deciding factor. He's like, no, this is right. Or what I would do is wrong. We need to do something right. We need to change this. And that's exactly what happened. And I feel like that applies to almost anything today. I feel like not a lot of people, they'll do protests or they'll do campaigns or something, but I think something's been this way for so long that it's just unfair and we can make it better. And I feel like that's what people, this movie kind of sparks that kind of wisdom to people that, it might be tough and you might go through a lot of stuff per se, but you stick with it, you keep your focus on where you're going, and I think any movement, as long as it's got a good cause and a lot of people to back it up, I think anything could happen. And that's why I actually enjoyed this film. I have never heard about this movie. I didn't know Hilary Swank was in this kind of movie. I'm not a fan of her, but I know everything. I know a lot of stuff she's been in. I never knew she did something like this. So, all in all, I think it was a great book or a great movie, and I enjoyed listening to it and trying to relate this back to our text and some of our discussion posts. And I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.